Hey, I'm Gabriel, and welcome to Worship Solutions. This is how not to set up your drum set. Actually, it wasn't as hard to play as we thought it would be, huh? Okay, for real this time. Let's talk about the right way to set up your drums. I'm just going to walk through some parameters. Every drummer has, their own individual tastes and placements that cater not only to their style, but also to the length of their arms and how tall they are, right? So you can take some liberties in this, but I'm just going to teach you a few principles that will help you kind of as a great starting place to know whether your drums are set up in such a way that might be comfortable to you, but maybe you're setting yourself up for some bad habits. And if that's the case, you'll want to reverse those habits and start to transition your kit into the right direction to give you good drumming posture. I don't have the best drumming posture in the world. There are drummers that have way better posture than I do. Dave Whitworth has great posture, Joe Volk, Jesse Proctor, like a lot of the guys that play, for the worship artists that you listen to and love, they're great. For me, I do like to sit up straight with my shoulders, kind of like, not slouching. It's kind of bad to play like that, right? So you kind of want to have yourself up and just give yourself some room to like lean into the groove when you get into it. But you don't want to be slouching your shoulders forward because it's going to set you up to not have very fast wrist response as you're going around the drums. So drummers will usually sit up kind of straight like this, and that's a good place to start. You'll notice that the snare is in between my knees. Generally speaking, most drummers, you don't want to be like way up on your snare with your knees completely to the center of the snare drum unless you have really, really long legs. I'm about 5'10" on a really confident day. So, for me, like my legs aren't super long. For me, I want the snare drum so that the center of, like when I'm holding my stick, the center of the snare is when my hand is on my thigh. That's kind of how I've learned to place my snare. So what happens is, the reason why that is you'll notice my elbow is like, my arm's pretty straight. My arm's not forward and it's not back, right? Because that would put my snare here or that would put my snare here. But in order to have my snare kind of in the center of my posture, the center of my stick gravity, that's where it is. So right here, this arm's straight, I can get to the center of the snare. This arm's pretty straight, I can get to the center of the snare, no problem. And so same thing, then everything kind of stems from that. I've got my kick drum to where if you were to put, when I'm in proper snare posture, my kick pedal is right with my legs straight down. I don't have my foot way forward. I'm not sitting super far back to where, it would look more like this from the aerial view, right? It's more that my knee is right where it needs to be in order for my stick to stay center of the snare. Same thing here with my hi-hat. My leg goes straight down. My hi-hat isn't way out here so that my foot's way out, right? My hi-hat is to where my legs are straight down to the ground. I hope that makes sense. Because I've seen some guys that, their kick drum's really far forward, or sometimes they're actually almost the opposite way to where their knee touches the rim. But at the end of the day, that builds some bad drumming posture, and we want to try to correct that. So as you're going then out from your snare drum onto the kit, you've got your hi-hat. Now notice my hi-hat is roughly 9 inches, maybe 8 inches or 10 inches right in there off of my snare drum. How I like to measure that is actually pretty easy. The black mark on a Pro Mark stick, super easy. That's the proper hi-hat. It's about halfway up your stick. So what that allows for is, like, my hands aren't going to hit each other because my hi-hat's not so low that as I'm playing a groove, I don't have any stick action with my left hand onto the snare. And my hi-hat isn't this high either, right? Because sometimes if it's this high up, as we illustrated earlier before, and your snare's too far low, it can be really, really awkward. Except, maybe in some interesting like vaudeville or like Blue Man Group sorts of like theatrical performances. But as a practice for drummers, it's best to have it about that far up, give or take a few inches at most. So that allows for like, just a reasonable amount of stick action, but you don't get carried away. I have my rack tom slightly inverted. Some guys will have flat rack toms, and that's totally a preference. I know some guys even have forward rack toms. I think Joe Volk, when I first saw him play, I don't know if he still does it this way, but I was always amazed. He had his tom kind of going or he had his tom up but his snare forward because that was like his technique. That's neither bad nor good. That's just a particular thing. My tom sits like super kind of facing me. If I'm laying my hand out, it's kind of like, you know, getting like a deer to eat in the palm of your hand, right? So my snare is mostly flat. My rack tom is, you know, at about this angle right there. My floor tom is at the same height as my snare. It's not lower, it's not actually higher, it's roughly the same height. So that allows for like, when you're doing these builds like that, you're not like way down low or way up high. And then out from there, at about the same height, roughly the same height and roughly the same angle, is my ride cymbal. Now sometimes I'll move my ride over just a little bit more with a boom stand, but not all of us have the luxury of a boom stand, which is why we wanted to use a straight stand, because not every church has really high quality, heavy duty boom cymbal stands that can support the weight of a big cymbal like a ride cymbal. So when you have a straight stand, it's just good to kind of put that. You'll notice the stand is roughly equal in distance. The base of the stand is about where the kick drum rim is, and that's going to put the bell of the cymbal about where the kick drum rim is, and you're just kind of moving it so that the points at which, when your arm is mostly straight, you're hitting the center of the drums and you're hitting the cymbal. If my cymbal was way out here, then I'd be here for like my fills and my cymbals out here. So you can kind of see the rhyme and reason of drum posture is you don't necessarily want to be reaching too far for things, unless that's just like, you know, man, I'm rocking out and I'm like really into this moment, you know, then it's kind of cool to have, you know, maybe a little bit more arm action, but you don't want that to be a necessity while you're playing because of poor kit placement. Cymbal over here, it's pretty easy. Cymbal here, this is just all a stick length. Crash cymbal here, you've got your floor tom. You don't necessarily, you can see from the overhead view, I've got a reasonable amount of real estate, and there's good distance between the cymbals and the center of my floor tom, right? So you want to make it so that you're not necessarily going, oh, crud, I just hit my ride cymbal. Like, you don't want to do that. So you basically want to keep it and make sure that your floor tom's center is accessible. And you can even do this while you're setting up your drums just with your hand. Like, am I actually able to get a whole hand straight down onto it? Because if so, then I'm probably going to be just fine as I'm playing around the drums. So that's a basic rundown, and I hope that helps you get great drum posture and even improves your chops, because you got to figure as things are placed with like a certain amount of intention and design, you can get faster with your runs, you play more effortlessly, it's easier to play with dynamics, and you're well on your way to becoming a great drummer.